Back on Hockey Central Saturday with Kwame Mason, who produced a great film documentary called Soul on Ice, Kwame, which chronicles really the history of black athletes in hockey, going back to the Coloured Hockey League in Nova Scotia, right on through the present, and talks about black athletes, not only their contributions to the game, but to society. So that's sort of the background or area of expertise that you bring to this. When you saw Devante Smith-Pelly, what did you think?
You know, it made me sad that for the time in which we are living, you still have to go through something like that in the game of hockey. You think that we got past that, especially in the professional level. And I actually had this weird sense, this weird goosebumps when I saw him grab his stick and go to the glass. You know, I felt the anger that he felt as well. But I thought he dealt with it correctly, because what he was saying to that gentleman was, "Did you hear that? Who's saying that?" And the gentleman actually said, "Oh, well, it's this guy over here." And I think that chant reverted him back to when he was younger. You see, when we talk about, you know, racial epithets coming into the professional level, a lot of the guys can really take it in one ear and out the other. But the issue is more so for the young kid that's playing in Alberta, that's playing in BC, that's playing in Toronto, and he's going out there and he's getting those same epithets at him. And a lot of these kids want to quit. A lot of these kids can't handle it, you know? And I think what Devante said in the interview was correct. You know, he had to call them out. Because if you hear something, you've got to say something. If you see something, you've got to say something. I think that's what he did, and I think he dealt with it correctly.
Why don't you explain the taunt, what it was?
Well, basically what had happened when he got the, you know, he had the fight and went into the box, and the crowd was yelling, "Basketball, basketball, basketball." And we all know what they mean by saying basketball. They're just really yelling at him, "You should be playing basketball." And this is something that a lot of young black athletes, past, present, and in the future, have had to go through in different rings across North America, where you'd have guys telling them, you know, in the stands, "You should be playing basketball." It's happened to Wayne Simmons, it's happened to Mike Marsden, it's happened to Willie O'Ree, it's happened to a whole host of guys. And so it also happened to Devante when he was playing in juniors. So I think at that time, you know, his team was down, he just got into a fight, he just couldn't handle it anymore, and he didn't want to just sit there and just let it be. He wanted to make sure that it was being called out.
You know, it's interesting, Kwame, we sometimes deny the behavior, or we minimize the behavior. We might say, oh, the fan was having a bad, or just being a fan, or if I were to go into the black neighborhood, they'd probably chirp me too.
Right.
A whole host of reasons why we devalue pain, and that was pain. It's remarkable to see, you know? And I think what I think is, you know, we all suffer indignities in our lives, but it's just very rare for us. It's very common for Devante.
Yeah, I mean, these guys, they just want to play hockey. They just want to play this game that they loved since they were a child. And, you know, for a lot of them in the past, they had to focus on the game. But they also had to focus on, what am I going to hear from the crowd? Who's going to throw chicken bones at me? Who's going to throw a basketball at me and yell certain epithets at me? And it should never have to be that way. And, you know, I felt the pain and I felt kind of angry when I saw that, but I also felt positive. I also felt good, because I knew that this was a moment that we can have a discussion, that we could talk about it, that we can call it out and say enough is enough, especially for the fans. If you're in the Maple Leaf Gardens or anywhere else in one of these great hockey cities and you're hearing fans using slurs, even if it's racial or any type of bigotry slang, call it out. Call an usher. We don't need that in the sport. We don't need that in the stands. We don't need that in our society.
I always have this awful fear. Kwame, honest to God, I don't see you as black. I don't see a woman as a woman. And I hate to say this because I understand how important all our initiatives are to kind of balance our world and our thinking. Right. But what I worry about when I say that is that I'm putting it on myself, or I'm putting it on the media, and I'll be able to say, well, there you go. I acknowledge, I empathize, and now can I just get on with my busy life?
Right. I mean, I think empathy is huge. That's the biggest thing for us in our society, is you have to be able to empathize with what somebody is going through. You may not understand, you may not agree, but you should be able to say to that person, you know, why do you feel like that? What's making you feel like that? And try to understand where they're coming from. And once you understand where they're coming from, I think that diffuses the ignorant attitude of shutting somebody down, you know, be it if it's an issue from a black person, a person from the gay community, from a woman. I mean, you just have to be able to empathize where they are coming from and why they feel the way that they feel.
Because one of the things, you know, I think a lot about ethics is you have to in this vocation. You and I are not responsible for Japanese being interned during the war. You and I are not part of the Holocaust. You and I aren't the ones who loaded the boats and created the slavery in the South. But we are not the ones that created the residential school or took the farmland from the First Nations.
Right.
So you say, well, it's not my, doing. But the lives that all those folks are living have been so directly affected.
And you have to also think that, okay, you may not have been the one that did all these things, but how are you benefiting from it?
Right.
And that's the biggest thing, especially in the United States of America. How do you benefit from slavery? How do you benefit from all the things that happen to these minority groups? So it may not be you directly, but you might be the recipient of that. You're able to, play a sport and not have anybody make remarks towards you. I mean, I think hockey lost themselves generations of great minority children, Chinese, indigenous, black, in all of Canada, just because they were not of the right color, So
totally. All that privilege, all that wealth,
yes,
it all is because of how things were 200 years ago. So those folks that lived on the plantation and benefited from that cheap black labor, they're doing well.
Yes.
Whereas the disadvantaged situation, so that's such an undercurrent that I think it's so important that we get out of ourselves and into that world.
Yes.
It's hard to, so, I mean, that to bury that pain, because when we have the conversation on race, it's loaded with these pathologies, right? That I think about, okay, if I'm black, I must feel a little moral superiority because I wasn't the one that would do such a heinous thing as was done.
Right.
So it's almost like you have to lie to me to put up with me.
Right. I mean, I think history is so important. And I mean, I hate to go off on a tangent, but that's why I made this documentary. I wanted to be able to talk about our history as good as it is and as bad as it is, because you have to understand where you came from to know where you're going. And so when you talk about the racial issues today, you have to look at where we have been. And I think because so many times we don't talk about it, we kind of brush it off, that's where our problems are leading us going towards the future. When you think of the indigenous people and what they went through, and you might be in Alberta, you might see an indigenous person that's on the street, that's a drunk, that's a homeless, and you look at them and you just get disgusted. You have to ask yourself, what put them in that situation? Let's look at their history. And then if we look at their history, we'll empathize on where they are today, and you might want to be able to put yourself in a position where you can help them so they can get better.
Which takes us right back to what you said. If you see something, say something. Exactly. So when you hear that racist joke or when you see that comment made about how they dress,
call it out.
Call it out, yeah.
Like, it doesn't make sense to just sit there and take it, because the thing that bothered me about the situation in Chicago was the simple fact that there was a group of fans that sat there and just let them say that. And they're probably laughing, and they're probably thinking it was smart until they saw how it affected a person, And I think, the Chicago Blackhawks did a great thing. They donated, I think it was maybe like $25,000 to Fort DuPont hockey organization in Washington. The league made a great statement, but we're the ones that go into the stands. We're the ones that are paying to go into these arenas to watch the game. And what environment do you want to be in? Do you want to be in a hostile environment? I mean, of course, we have our favorite teams and, we want to chirp at the opposing team, but to what cost? It's just a game. Right. And it's supposed to entertain us. It's supposed to make us feel good. And the simple fact is you were winning 4-1. You still feel the need to just knock some, we have to have a little bit more of a moral compass when we're out there in these environments.
And I guess, Kwame, the last thing I kind of think about, anytime you have pack mentality or groupthink in trying to broach these subjects, you're kind of denying individual responsibility. So Carl Subban is going to be on Rogers Hometown Hockey.
Great man.
So yeah, right, we're going to be in Belleville where Amy McMillan, Biller did the 3 Subbans.
Yes.
It's a magical story, right? It can't get any better. And how it must be for them to worry about maybe being the whistleblower, or maybe being the troublemaker, if in fact they were ever to speak to it. So Carl, an educator, somehow, some way has, I don't know if he's protected them or given them ways of dealing with some of it, but it must be difficult, right? When you know you have the power, you have such influence as the Subans.
And, you know, like you said, the whistleblower and all that, you have to think about, I know I've talked to ex-players, guys who played in like the 70s, 80s, from like the generation of Tony McKegney's, and, you know, those guys were honest with me, and they would say, hey, listen, you know, when things happened, we just didn't say anything because we didn't want to be looked at as a troublemaker. Because what would happen is our ice time would go down. Another team may not pick us up because we are, you know, known to be the ones who would be the troublemaker, the one that might stir something up. And that's sad, that you have to take something and bottle it up. So what I think the greatness of Carl Subban is, he has been able to teach his boys, you don't have to take it, but you don't have to explode. There is a fine line that you can walk on to speak about what you're going through and let someone know that, you know what, that wasn't right, but at the same time, you're respecting the conversation, because you have to have a good dialogue so that everybody can respect where you're coming from.
There's an incredible sequence in the penalty box with the Nashville Predators and PK Subban where he's mad at a call and he's slamming his stick, and while he's slamming his stick to protest the referee, he's patting the guy in the box, letting him know it's okay. And that just speaks to that wisdom that they've obviously shared.
You know, well, they just want to be good people. They want to be good people, and they just want to play hockey.
Congrats on Soul on Ice is magic, and this was lovely.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you having me.
Damon Kwame Mason. You'll see him at the Oscars. Sure.